Hi, I'm astrologer Penny Dix and welcome to another Astrovite. And I thought it might be interesting to look at Chiron, our space object, which is part of a group of space objects called the Centaurs. And it is a centaur, and which means it's half man, half horse. And of course, Chiron was the wounded healer. He had a wound that never healed. Do you have a wound that never heals? I think to some extent we all have a wound that never heals. But Chiron today on the 30th of July is going to go retrograde in Aries until the 29th of December this year. And it will move from 22 degrees of Aries all the way back to 18 degrees of Aries. So I just thought it might be quite interesting to have a look at this energy, because on the surface you think, okay, Chiron's going retrograde, so what? Well, actually, so what? What can this represent? And how can we use the energy of this cosmic body retracing his steps through Aries, the sign of the self, of identity, of courage, of instinct and assertion, of action? And Chiron being associated with deep soul wounds, also having the healing abilities gained from the wisdom and insight of understanding how he received and processed those wounds. It's the wisdom born from suffering. So let's have a look at Chiron retrograde in Aries. That sounds like I need a little music intro there, da 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 da, to herald in Chiron retrograde in Aries. But I don't. We just have me, and so that's what we're going to get. So, Chiron, the wounded healer, represents the areas within ourselves, in our psyche and our soul, where we carry pain of past traumas. And this is not pain that can necessarily be completely healed or fixed, but somehow it has to be integrated into the self. And so that leads us ultimately to be able to use this healing from this raw wound as a source of wisdom. If we think about it, I'm sure if you think about it, there will initially be a first thought about what your particular wound is. And I know for me, I have a first thought that floods into my mind about a wound that never heals. For me, it was not having a child. I'm not going to go into the whys and wherefores of why that couldn't or didn't happen. But it's a deep wound for me, and a sadness and a sorrow. Have I learnt from it? I would say I'm in the process of. I'm still in the process of learning from that wound, and choices and decisions that I made along the path and the circumstances around that period of life. So have a think about what your deepest wounds are, how they express themselves through the energy of Aries, through that lens of assertion, of courage, of action. Is there something active you can do to ease the way? Aries Aries, being the first sign of the zodiac, is really very much who we are at a very basic level. Chiron going retrograde here is going to turn our attention inward to that core self, the wound that is buried deep in our very identity, a wound that maybe takes courage to talk about. Certainly my wound would take a lot of courage to talk about, and I'm not ready to do that yet. So there are questions you could ask yourself. Do you feel worthy of being as you are now, maybe not having fully processed some of these wounds or this wound? Do you sweep under the carpet instincts or desires that, if you bring them into the forefront, can create conflict? Another thing you could ask yourself is, were you ever made to feel as if you were just too much for people to take? Too loud, too extrovert, too assertive? Or were you not enough? So the transit of Chiron retrograde, so we've got the rest of the year to actually maybe spend a bit of time reflecting on it. It can help us revisit our childhood injuries, maybe incidents in our life that have brought up the feeling of shame, moments perhaps when we weren't acknowledged for showing independence, or where we were made to feel bad for showing our feelings or anger. And maybe what we have to do is look at that and find a new way to write that story, a new way to tell it. So you could ask yourself, if you want to reassert yourself, do you avoid conflict to keep the peace? Well, if I ask myself that question, I'd say, to a certain extent, yes. I'm getting better. Now I'm mature. Well, in theory, I'm supposed to be mature, but do you react rather than actually just stand up for your beliefs and views? And another way to look at it is, do you still look for validation? Is that something you constantly need to do? Because there's something with this energy where with Chiron retrograde, you can look at how you can develop being assertive, but in a very healthy way. Knowing from your inner core that you have the right to have a view, to exist, to speak, and to act without apology. We have to remember that Aries, whose ruler is Mars, is the warrior archetype. So this is where with Chiron retrograde, that we move from impulsivity more to being assertive or courageous in a more conscious way. It's not about being fearless, but it's about feeling the fear and doing it anyway. I've got some quotes to come on to, but there is a quote that you may know quite well because it's a Rumi quote, which is, "The wound is the place where the light enters you." And this Chiron retrograde can help you find that inner power, that deep, dark Pluto side of your psyche, through the vulnerability of looking and being aware on in the conscious self of the shame we may have felt around decisions we've made in the past that perhaps went against all that we felt was right and good, but we felt cornered, or we had at that time, we could see no other way. And so it's about confronting that belief that we have to go it alone. So we know that collectively at the moment, we've got a lot of retrograde energy. We've got Mercury retrograde in Leo, fire. Now Chiron retrograde in Aries, fire. Neptune and Saturn are both also retrograde in Aries, fire. Real fiery energy that is being asked to go back and relook at things. So I suspect that the toxicity of certain situations on the world stage will come in under a spotlight, under the microscope, so that there will be like a global reckoning around leadership and about the masculine, patriarchal way of managing world affairs, the aggressive behavior that can be there. And I think that there will be a sense of looking for ways to cut through all of that rhetoric, to find the authentic truth of what these people really believe and want to say, with brave, non-violent expression. What can you do to help yourself whilst Chiron is retrograde? So this is for the rest of the year. You could ask yourself, who am I when I'm not in the public eye, when I'm just me at home, privately? What anger about everything and anything am I too afraid to feel? This is a good time to do that inner child work and reflect on your childhood and look at where there is shame, you were made to feel shame. I remember something really so, in a sense, insignificant, but it sticks in my mind so strongly, which was being at an event at my father's golf club. And the mayor of the town was there to, open a new pro shop or something like that. And we're all standing around, and I was only about, 9-10 years old. And I can remember standing in the front row, and I guess my parents must have been behind me. And the mayor looked across in my general direction. Clearly, he wasn't looking at me, but I thought he was. And he looked at someone behind me, which is what I realized afterwards, and went, so he was beckoning someone who was behind me to come over to him. I thought, me? He wants me up there with him. And I ran across to him and I said, yes, how can I help? he was very kind. He said, "Oh," he said, "I'm so sorry. I was looking at the gentleman behind you. I need him to come across and do something for me." In those few seconds, the horror, the shame of exposing myself and exposing actually an early example of my Leo ascendant of wanting to be center stage, the exposure of that put me in touch with the most terrible shame. You know, I could actually say I've never got over that. I mean, nobody noticed, nobody said a thing. They thought she's a child. But I noticed it. And I went away absolutely full of shame. And I think that the reason I'm bringing up is that when we do reflect back to childhood and we think about these situations where we have perhaps done something which has exposed us, this is an opportunity to have a look at them more deeply. Let them go and heal them. I tell you what, I never made that mistake again. If someone looked at me in a crowd, I would always, since that day, go, "Oh, it's not me, it's them." Or, "Me? Oh, you do want me." I was never going to make that mistake again. So look how much we can get on a self-development level from Chiron going retrograde. This is about also boundaries. Learn how to say no. Learn how to say no without feeling guilty. So I do have some quotes about Chiron retrograde, and this is actually specifically about Chiron retrograde and quotes that reflect the energy and healing journey of Chiron in Aries, because it does talk about the wound of identity, self-worth, courage, assertion, the right to exist as oneself. And I suppose that Chiron, especially in Aries, is the I am wound and the shame. So we've got one here which is about healing the wound of identity and courage, and it's Dr. Thema Bryant, and she said, "You were not born to shrink. You were not born to shrink into someone else's idea of you. You were born to stand tall in your own truth." That's a really good one to describe this retrograde Chiron, and shedding those layers of covering up where we patchwork ourselves, our psyche, our soul, our older self, our inner child. There's an unknown quote here, which is, "I will not trade my authenticity for your approval." Oh, I like that. Oh, I've had a recent experience of that where someone didn't like what I said. And I said, "Do not tell me what I can or I can't say in a completely open and free situation. I will not be told what I can and can't say." I think they were surprised. So Audre Lorde said, "Your silence will not protect you." True. And this is one that we've had before and you will recognize, which is by Ralph Waldo Emerson, which is, "To be yourself in a world that is constantly trying to make you something else is the greatest accomplishment." And AG, whoever AG is, said, "I am learning to love the sound of my feet walking away from the things not meant for me. These are just wonderful ways of working with the energy of retrograde Chiron. Here are some more about healing through self-acceptance and bold vulnerability. Louise Hay said, "You have been criticizing yourself for years and it hasn't worked." Yeah, I think I have. Try approving of yourself and see what happens. I think I ought to repeat that, because as I was saying it, I was thinking, oh my goodness, that inner voice that says, don't do that, you're rubbish, or that wasn't very good, or that was a silly thing to say. So let's have that one again. You have been criticizing yourself for years and it hasn't worked. Try approving of yourself and see what happens. John Acuff said, be brave enough to be bad at something new. Yeah, I like that. And Mary Ann Radmacher, whoever she is, sorry, I've probably got the name totally wrong, said, courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes courage is the quiet voice at the end of the day saying, I will try again tomorrow. And that's what we have to do. We have to keep on keeping on. Anais Nin said, my mission, should I choose to accept it, is to find peace with exactly who I am and what I am. To take pride in my thoughts, my appearance, my talents, my flaws, and to stop this incessant worrying that I can't be loved as I am. There's a lovely unknown one here. You don't need permission to exist or to take up space. You already do. And finally, we've got some warrior wounds of how to transmute anger and action. Glennon Doyle said, anger is just sadness that had nowhere to go for a very long time. And there's an unknown one here, which is healing is not becoming the best version of yourself. It is letting the worst version of yourself be loved. Warts and all. Angela Davis said, I am no longer accepting the things I cannot change. I am changing the things I cannot accept. Like that. Ferdinand Foch said, the most powerful weapon on earth is the human soul on fire. Yeah. And finally, we've got one from Brené Brown, which is, there is nothing more daring than showing up, owning our brokenness, and loving ourselves anyway. So there we go. I thought a quick look at Chiron Retrograde. I'm also surprised that once I started doing my research that I came up with so much material for Chiron Retrograde. So I've learned something today, and I hope you have too. Thank you so much for coming to watch. And please remember to like, comment, and subscribe. And remember, if you would like to book a session with me, go to my website, pennydix.com, and send me personally an email at penny@pennydix.com. Tell me your time zone, and we'll find a suitable slot to suit both of us. Okay, so on that note, I'll say have a fabulous day, and I look forward to seeing you very soon. Bye for now. Bye.